Sometimes we know more about the type of an object than TypeScript. Here's a real example. In JavaScript, we have this document object that represents a document or an HTML page loaded in a browser. Now, in this object, we have a method called getElementById for getting a reference to an element on this page. Now, look at the signature of this method. Here we have one parameter called elementId, which is a string, and the method returns either an HTML element or null. So nothing new so far. So let's imagine on this HTML page, we have an input field called phone. So we pass that as a string and then get a reference to that input field. So let's store it in a variable called phone. Now let's look at the type of phone. It's either an HTML element or null in case that element was not found. But let's imagine that we do have an element by this name. So the type of phone is definitely HTML element. Now, HTML element is a class defined in JavaScript that represents any kind of HTML elements. It's like the base or parent class for other types of elements. So we have more specific elements like HTML, input elements, and so on. Now, elements of this type have an extra property called value for reading the value entered by the user. However, if we type phone.value, we cannot see that property. Yes, we have other properties like ARIA_VALUE_MAX, ARIA_VALUE_MIN, and so on, but none of these properties represent the value entered by the user. This is where we use a type assertion. So we're going to tell the TypeScript compiler, hey, I know more about the type of this object than you. So after this expression, we type as, and then specify the target type, HTML input element. Now, the type of phone is HTML input element. And if we type phone period, we can see the value property. So this is type assertion in action. Now, in some other programming languages like C#, we also have the as keyword, but the as keyword functions differently in those languages. In TypeScript, the as keyword doesn't perform any type conversion. So it's not going to convert the object that is returned from this method to a different type of object. This is purely for telling the compiler that we know more about the type of this object. So if the object that is returned from this method is not an HTML input element, this line is not going to raise any exceptions. And instead, when we try to access this property, the value property, our program is going to crash. So be aware of this. There is no type conversion happening under the hood. Now, there's another syntax to use a type assertion. So instead of using the as keyword, we prefix this expression with angle brackets, and here we add the target type, HTML input element.